Yes, I think we all have our moments. Laura Petrie broke down and cried. She was nasty and short-tempered.
Sort of a strained idealization of the American woman as she thinks she is, but it had no connection with reality.
May you have the pleasure and joy working with Mary Tyler Moore.
She could turn the world on with her smile. She could throw her hat into the air with effortless confidence, light up an entire nation with a single laugh, and convince America that she was the living symbol of optimism. For generations, Mary Tyler Moore wasn't just a television star.
Her 7 Emmy Awards, her 3 Golden Globe Awards, and her Academy Award nomination are only the beginning of the story.
She was a cultural blueprint, a model of independence, a beacon for women who believed they could stand tall, earn their own paychecks, and take ownership of their dreams. But behind all that sunshine was a storm, one Hollywood never wanted the world to see. The real Mary Tyler Moore wasn't the woman viewers imagined. She wasn't always poised. She wasn't always confident. She wasn't always happy. In fact, behind the carefully polished image lay a story marked by loss, distance, addiction, conflict, and an ocean of emotional wounds that never fully healed. And today, after decades of silence, we revisit that story, the story Hollywood kept buried. A story that reveals not a fallen icon, but a human being. Someone painfully real, deeply complicated, and far more resilient than the industry's myth-making machine ever allowed the public to understand. The tragedy that forever split her life in two. On October 14th, 1980, Mary Tyler Moore's life changed forever. It didn't happen on a television set. There was no laugh track, no applause, no cameras rolling. Her only child, 4-year-old Richard Meeker Jr., known simply as Richie, was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The news hit the entertainment world with violent force. One of America's most cherished women had just experienced a nightmare no parent ever recovers from. But behind the public grief, behind the headlines and the funeral, lay a story far more complicated, a story Mary herself rarely spoke about, and one Hollywood quietly avoided. Because Richard's death did more than devastate her emotionally. It exposed the real Mary Tyler Moore, a mother who carried guilt, regret, and decades of unanswered questions. The unseen struggle of a mother and a son. Mary became a mother at just 19. She was young, ambitious, scared, and already dreaming of an entertainment career. Richie's father, Richard Meeker Sr., provided stability and a traditional home. But Mary was chasing something bigger, a calling on the stage, in front of the camera, under the bright studio lights of a world that valued perfection above everything. As she rose from commercials to the Dick Van Dyke Show, Mary's life transformed. She became America's sweetheart long before she was ready to understand what the role required. And while the nation fell in love with her, Richie grew up watching his mother slip further and further from his everyday life. Mary later admitted it bluntly, "I was not the greatest mother." It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't an attempt to rewrite history. It was the truth, one she carried with her until her final days. As Mary became more consumed by her work, Richie became more consumed by the shadow cast by his mother's fame. The more successful she became, the more distance grew between them. Not anger, not hatred, just a quiet, painful disconnect, the kind that slowly eats away at both sides without either fully understanding how to bridge it. A son lost in his mother's limelight. By his teenage years, Richie split time between Mary and his father. He loved her deeply, but he struggled with what it meant to be Mary Tyler Moore's son. People expected him to be perfect. People expected him to be charming. People expected him to be everything she was, even though he never asked to inherit that pressure. Close friends noted he often felt out of place, drifting, searching for identity. Some described periods where he experimented with substances. Others recall him shifting from hobby to hobby, career idea to career idea, unable to find a direction that felt truly his. Mary didn't talk about these struggles at the time. She kept them hidden, just like Hollywood wanted. Because the industry relied on her being flawless, the ideal working woman who never complained, never cried, never faltered, the gunshot that shattered everything. The official report on Richie's death concluded it was an accident. A small shotgun, a snake charmer, known for its compact size, discharged while he handled it in his USC apartment. At least, that was the official version of events. But for Mary, nothing about the story felt complete. She questioned why the gun was loaded. She questioned why he was handling it that day. She questioned whether it truly had been an accident. For the rest of her life, these questions buried themselves deep inside her, unanswered, unhealed, unresolved. Those closest to Mary described the aftermath as catastrophic. She felt responsible. She felt guilty. She felt like she'd failed the only person in the world who depended on her, not for her fame, not for her acting talent, but simply for her presence as a mother. One friend said, "America's sweetheart lost her only child and never fully came back from it." The public smile and the private break. After Richie's death, Hollywood expected Mary to return to work, put the pain aside, and continue being the woman America adored. The upbeat icon, the trailblazer, the embodiment of cheerful independence. But inside, she was unraveling. She blamed herself. She questioned every choice she'd made as a young rising star, every night she worked late, every moment she wasn't home, every milestone she missed. In her autobiography, she laid her guilt bare. By the time Richie was 5, I had already let him down. It was a rare confession in an industry built on illusions, a confession that broke her open. Yet even then, Hollywood shrugged it off. Too dark, executives said. Not the image, publicists warned. So the tragedy became something quietly acknowledged, but never explored. Something whispered, never discussed aloud. This was the first deep fracture in Mary's life story, the one the world never fully saw. But it wasn't the only one. Behind the smile, a drink in her hand. While Mary was winning awards, delivering iconic performances, and inspiring millions of women to pursue their independence, she was fighting a private war, one she hid even better than her grief. Mary Tyler Moore was an alcoholic. Her drinking began quietly during the Dick Van Dyke Show era. Fame was skyrocketing, expectations were intensifying, and with every new achievement came a new wave of pressure to maintain her perfect public image. She drank to relax, then she drank to cope, then she drank to function. Behind the scenes, some cast and crew noticed tiny cracks, moments when she forgot lines she'd normally deliver with flawless timing, days when she appeared tired, distracted, or emotionally distant. But Mary was a master performer, not just on screen, but in life. She hid her dependency with precision. While the world saw a smiling, high-achieving, independent woman, her evenings often ended with a drink that slowly became several, and her mornings began with the weight of a secret she was terrified the world would uncover, the risk of losing everything. By the mid-1970 seconds after the Mary Tyler Moore Show completed its historic and culture-shifting run, Mary's life slipped into a much darker rhythm, one she never publicly acknowledged at the time. The world saw a groundbreaking icon, a woman who had changed television and redefined the image of the independent working woman. But behind the cameras, when the applause faded and the sets went dark, Mary was fighting a battle she couldn't outrun. Her drinking, once occasional and easy to disguise, slowly began to intensify. It didn't happen overnight. It crept in quietly, fueled by a storm of pressures that piled heavier with each passing year. There was the relentless expectation to always be composed, always be perfect, always radiate the sunny confidence America associated with her name. There was the silent collapse of her marriage, a heartbreak she tried to manage with the same poise she brought to her characters. And beneath all of that was the guilt she carried over her complicated relationship with her son, guilt that only intensified after his tragic death. Each burden alone would have been enough to break someone. Together, they created a weight even Mary struggled to bear. Friends noticed she was withdrawing. Producers noticed her spark dimming. Even Mary noticed the shift, the way she relied on alcohol to silence emotions she didn't want to face. But in Hollywood, especially at that time, a woman wrestling with addiction wasn't seen with compassion. It was seen as instability, as unreliability, as a threat to her own career. So Mary did what she had done her entire life. She protected her image. She buried the truth. She hid her pain behind immaculate makeup and flawless performances. She smiled through interviews, events, and appearances as if nothing inside her was unraveling. But there comes a moment when even the strongest cannot hide anymore. And for Mary, that moment arrived in 1984. Quietly, without press, without dramatic announcements, she checked herself into the Betty Ford Center. It was a decision that would save her life. It was also the moment the world finally understood how much she had been carrying under her polished, iconic exterior. A woman at war with herself. Mary later wrote, "I drank to numb the loneliness. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of living a life where everyone adored the character she played, while very few ever truly saw the woman underneath." Her alcoholism wasn't a fall from grace. It was the human reaction to decades of pressure, expectation, and emotional wounds that never healed. But what makes this part of her story even more significant is this. She hid her drinking while portraying the most admired, seemingly flawless working woman on television. Mary Richards was confident, balanced, warm, reliable. Mary Tyler Moore was struggling, guarded, exhausted, and desperate to keep her imperfections from ruining everything she built. This contradiction became one of the defining battles of her life. The Hollywood version of her life and the real one. Hollywood sold the world a myth of Mary Tyler Moore, a myth of perpetual optimism, a myth of perfect independence, a myth of a woman who had everything under control. But as her personal life cracked, she held the pieces together with raw determination long before she admitted to herself that she was falling apart. The truth is, Mary Tyler Moore didn't just carry the weight of fame, she carried the weight of expectation. And after the explosive revelations hinted at the end of her first chapter, the real story begins to unspool. Because the sparkling exterior America adored had cracks forming long before anyone realized they were there. The moment she stepped into the world of television, she was forced to choose between being the woman she wanted to be and the woman the world demanded she become. And that choice would come back to haunt her in ways even she couldn't control. As the 1,970 seconds rolled forward and her influence only grew, it became increasingly difficult for Mary to protect the pieces of her life she had hidden away. Every interview, every photo shoot, every public appearance required her to keep a smile on her face, even when the truth behind her eyes was far darker than anyone guessed. Her carefully curated image wasn't just a brand, it was a shield, and that shield was starting to crack. Behind the cameras, Mary was still struggling to navigate a world that constantly demanded perfection from her. She knew that being a pioneer meant carrying the weight of millions of women who saw her as a symbol of independence. But that independence had come at a cost. The industry she helped shape didn't always embrace her with the same warmth she showed the audience. Producers wanted control, networks wanted numbers, and critics wanted vulnerability they could exploit. Mary gave them just enough to keep them satisfied, but never enough to reveal the battles she was fighting in silence. As she continued to work tirelessly on her hit show, she also worked to maintain the illusion that her personal life was just as polished. The truth, however, was far from perfect. Her marriage was under increasing strain, not because of infidelity or scandal, but because the demands of her career left little room for anything else. Mary had become the kind of woman she portrayed on screen, strong, successful, assertive. But with that evolution came an unexpected consequence. Her real-life partnerships couldn't always keep up. Friends who visited her during this period described her home as immaculate, almost too spotless, as if she feared that any sign of disorder would betray the turmoil she refused to confess. She kept trophies neatly displayed, scripts stacked in pristine piles, and personal journals locked away where no one could find them. Mary was building a museum of control to distract from the chaos she felt inside. And still, the public had no idea. What they also didn't know was how deeply Mary was haunted by the mistakes she felt she had made as a mother. She rarely talked about it in interviews, but those close to her understood that motherhood was a subject filled with heartbreak and guilt. Her career, which had given her power and influence, had also demanded sacrifices she could never reclaim. She tried to be present, to be available, to be the kind of mother she believed her son deserved. But between long filming days, endless meetings, and travel schedules, she often found herself arriving late to the moments that mattered most. This tension between professional triumph and personal regret became one of the defining conflicts of Mary's life. It was the one story she never fully allowed the world to hear, the one truth that sat quietly behind her famous smile. And while she cherished her child deeply, the demands of fame created a distance she struggled to close. She convinced herself she would always have more time. But life doesn't always wait for good intentions. As pressure mounted both at work and at home, Mary found herself turning to coping mechanisms that slowly began to take control. She wanted to appear composed, disciplined, and fully in charge. But the truth is that even someone as resilient as Mary Tyler Moore had limits. And as those limits were pushed, small cracks in her armor began to turn into full fractures. During late-night rehearsals, cast members occasionally noticed her losing her place in the script. She would shake it off with her trademark charm, blaming exhaustion or distraction, but a few knew that something deeper was wrong. Mary began to withdraw, spending more time alone in her dressing room, writing in those locked journals or pacing quietly as if searching for clarity she couldn't find. The bright, confident woman America adored was fighting battles no one was allowed to see. One of those battles was the growing storm around her public image. As journalists became more aggressive, rumors began swirling about the possibility of on-set conflicts, marital struggles, and emotional strain. Most were exaggerated or completely fabricated, but the mere existence of those rumors threatened everything Mary had built. She couldn't allow the world to believe she was anything less than strong. So she did what she had always done. She worked harder. But work can only distract from reality for so long, and Mary's reality was about to shift in a way she could never prepare for. It came quietly at first, a sense that she was losing control of her narrative. She could feel the industry changing around her. Younger stars were rising. The kind of shows she had once pioneered were evolving, and Mary, who had spent her life at the center of television's golden age, felt herself slowly being pushed to the outskirts. The fear of losing relevance gnawed at her. She wanted to reinvent herself, to prove she was still a force to be reckoned with. But reinvention takes courage, and courage takes clarity. And clarity was something Mary was struggling to hold on to. As the years passed, she sought refuge in the few friendships she trusted. These were the people who saw her without the spotlight, who listened without judgment, who understood that being Mary Tyler Moore meant living with impossible expectations. They saw the exhaustion in her posture, the tension in her voice, the moments when her eyes betrayed emotions she didn't dare speak aloud. Her friends knew she was fighting to keep herself together, but even they didn't understand just how close she was to breaking. The turning point came unexpectedly, during what should have been a moment of triumph. Mary had taken on a new project, one she believed would mark a return to form. She threw herself into the role with the same dedication that had fueled her earlier successes. But instead of celebration, she encountered criticism sharper than anything she'd experienced before. Reviewers who once praised her now dissected her performance with cold detachment. The show struggled, the network questioned, and Mary found herself confronting the painful reality that the world she once dominated was slipping out of her grasp. For a woman who built her life on perfection and control, the idea of failure was devastating. It wasn't just professional disappointment, it was a personal wound that cut deep into her identity. She had always believed that hard work and talent would carry her through any storm. But this storm was different. This storm forced her to face the truth she had avoided for years. She could no longer outrun her fears. That realization marked the beginning of Mary's quiet transformation. She stepped back from the constant demands of work and allowed herself time to breathe, time to reflect, time to confront the parts of her life she had buried beneath layers of fame. And as she did, she discovered something she had forgotten, something both powerful and terrifying. She discovered that vulnerability didn't make her weak, it made her human. Mary began to open up to those around her in ways she never had before. She talked about the pressure, the loneliness, the mistakes, the guilt. She allowed herself to feel the emotions she had spent decades suppressing. And in doing so, she began to rebuild something she had lost: trust in herself. But healing is never simple. And for Mary, the next chapter would bring both redemption and heartbreak. As she found strength in vulnerability, she also faced consequences she could no longer avoid. The public still saw her as untouchable, a legend. But legends are still human, and Mary's humanity was about to collide with tragedy in a way that would reshape the rest of her life. Because just when she began to find peace, the past she thought she had escaped came crashing back with devastating force. And this time, there was no script to hide behind, no character to play, no smile to mask the truth. As Mary entered this final and most turbulent chapter of her life, the quiet storms she had kept inside for years began to unravel in ways even she wasn't prepared to face. She had always believed that if she worked hard enough, stayed composed long enough, and maintained her signature grace, she could outrun the parts of her life that haunted her. But time has a way of forcing truths to the surface, no matter how deeply they're buried. And the truth was that Mary Tyler Moore, the woman millions saw as the epitome of strength and optimism, was standing on the edge of a moment that would change everything. The moment arrived without warning, a phone call brief, abrupt, devastating. Her son, the person she loved but always feared she hadn't loved enough, was gone. A sudden, tragic accident. The kind that leaves behind not just grief but questions, guilt, and unbearable silence. Mary's world, so carefully held together for so long, cracked in a way that nothing could hide. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't have the emotional armor to protect herself. The loss shattered her. Friends who saw her in the weeks after the tragedy described her as a completely different person. The sparkle in her eyes was gone. Her posture, once upright and confident, seemed to collapse inward. Mary wasn't simply grieving. She was collapsing under the weight of years of unspoken regret. She kept replaying every missed moment, every late night at the studio, every time she told herself there would be another chance. She wrote in her journals obsessively, filling pages with questions she knew she could never answer. She became withdrawn, almost unreachable, and for a time, it seemed as if the world had finally taken everything from her. Publicly, she tried to remain composed. After all, the world still expected Mary Tyler Moore, the symbol, the icon, the unstoppable force. But privately, she was facing a devastation so deep it nearly swallowed her whole. Yet, it was in this darkest season that something unexpected began to happen. Instead of fading into obscurity, Mary found a flicker of strength buried beneath her grief. She realized that staying silent wouldn't allow her to heal. She needed to be honest with herself and with the world. And so, for the first time in her long career, she allowed herself to be vulnerable on purpose. She began opening up publicly about her struggles, about loss, about the pressures of fame, and about the complicated, imperfect role she had played in her son's life. This honesty didn't weaken her image, it humanized her in a way nothing else ever had. People admired her more, not less. Fans who had grown up watching her laugh now saw a woman who had survived unimaginable pain, and they related to her more deeply than ever before. Mary had always been a trailblazer in television, but now she was becoming something even more powerful, a voice of truth in a world that often pretended everything was perfect. As she began speaking more openly, something inside her shifted. She realized that her story, the real story, could help others who were suffering silently. And that realization gave her purpose again. She began advocating for causes she believed in, using her platform not just for entertainment, but for change. Her work on health advocacy, particularly around issues that affected her personally, became a cornerstone of her later life. It allowed her to transform her pain into something meaningful, something that mattered beyond the screen. Slowly, the pieces of her life that had shattered began to rearrange into a new form, not the flawless image she had once tried to maintain, but an honest one. She returned to acting occasionally, choosing roles that reflected her maturity and emotional depth rather than trying to reclaim the innocence of her early career. Critics praised her for it. Audiences embraced her. Mary had evolved, and the world was ready for the woman she had become. But even as she rebuilt, she never forgot the price she had paid along the way. Her journals from this period reveal a woman who understood both the power and the cost of fame. She wrote about the fragility of identity, the danger of perfectionism, and the importance of showing people who you really are before it's too late. And though she never escaped the shadow of her personal tragedies, she learned how to live with them instead of running from them. As the years continued, Mary found comfort in smaller things, the companionship of close friends, the quiet routines of daily life, the simple joy of a peaceful morning. She learned to let go of the idea that she had to constantly prove herself. She realized that her legacy was already cemented, not because she'd been perfect, but because she had dared to be groundbreaking. She had dared to be herself. And yet, even in this period of acceptance, there were moments when the past returned unexpectedly. Interviews that touched on her son, old photographs that resurfaced memories of happier times, fans who reminded her of the woman she once was. Each moment brought its own emotional weight. But instead of collapsing under it, Mary allowed herself to feel the weight, acknowledge it, and carry it with grace. It was no longer something she ran from, it was part of her story. In these final years, Mary also began reconnecting with people she had distanced herself from during her rise to fame. She apologized where apologies were needed. She offered forgiveness where forgiveness had long been denied. She rebuilt bridges she had once burned, not because she sought redemption from others, but because she sought peace within herself. Her relationships deepened, her friendships grew more intimate, and though she never publicly detailed the full extent of her private struggles, those closest to her understood the magnitude of what she had survived. They saw in her a resilience that didn't come from success, but from endurance. Mary's final public appearances carried a kind of solemn elegance that spoke volumes about her journey. Her smile wasn't the bright, effortless beam that had once lit up television screens. It was softer, more reflective. It carried both joy and sorrow. It carried a lifetime of triumphs and mistakes. It carried wisdom, and the world sensed it. Fans who saw her in person often remarked that being in her presence felt like witnessing the closing chapter of a legend, one who had given everything she had, both on screen and off. When her health began to decline, Mary faced it with the same quiet determination that had defined her greatest battles. She remained dignified, honest, hopeful. Even in the final stages of her life, she continued to advocate for causes she believed in and stayed connected to the world she had influenced so deeply. She never saw herself as a victim of her struggles. She saw herself as someone who had lived fully, imperfectly, and bravely. And when the end finally came, the tributes poured in from every corner of the industry. Actors she had inspired, writers who owed her their careers, women who felt empowered because she showed them what was possible. Fans who had grown up with her voice echoing through their living rooms. They didn't remember the scandals or the struggles or the mistakes. They remembered the woman who had changed television forever. They remembered her laughter, her courage, her ability to make people feel less alone. They remembered the real Mary Tyler Moore. In the years that followed, her story continued to resonate. Documentaries, retrospectives, and biographies tried to capture the complexity of her life, but the truth is, no single narrative could fully contain it. Mary was too layered, too human, too extraordinary to fit into one neatly packaged story. She had lived a life defined by contradictions, strength and vulnerability, fame and loneliness, triumph and tragedy. And that's precisely what made her unforgettable. Her legacy isn't just about the shows she starred in or the awards she won. It's about the barriers she broke, the lives she touched, and the honesty she found after decades of hiding behind perfection. It's about a woman who learned, after a lifetime of striving, that the greatest power comes not from what the world thinks of you, but from the courage to face who you really are. Mary Tyler Moore's story did not end with the final credits of her career. It lives on in every woman who dares to be ambitious, every performer who dares to be vulnerable, and every person who realizes that perfection is not the goal, authenticity is. And in that authenticity, Mary found the kind of peace she had been seeking her entire life.